Leonard Slatkin gets there, and he made it his mission to make them the most accessible orchestra on the planet. And the idea here was, rather than telling people at a concert like they always do to put away your phones, he actually asked them to take out their phones.
Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of October 21st, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a story of a high school band that isn't just on the street, it is the street. An Allentown travel story. This podcast's first brush with poetry. And a conversation with a marketing genius. I should probably get some tips from him. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. I feel like the theme of this episode might be Did Not See That Coming. There are references to poets and marketers, city councils and list journalism and truck drivers. And honestly, that was kind of my goal when I set this podcast idea in motion. As good and useful as a podcast specifically pitched at band directors and band director topics is, or one dealing exclusively with the marching arts, or a podcast whose whole purpose is to review newly published band literature, all of which I listen to, by the way, and you can find them with a very low-intensity Google search. I think I was interested in making a podcast where you knew what the basic overarching topic was, band, but you couldn't necessarily predict what you were going to hear from week to week. In my mind, that meant let's make sure we talk as much about seated bands as marching ones. Let's make sure we cover enough different subcategories of the larger band world in every episode that there would be at least some one thing that would interest each listener, each episode, no matter what their particular band background was. This week, though, I feel like we're going to be looking at a lot of different topics through the lens of the band world. I think there will be some nice surprises coming at you. You can be the judge, but I had a good time putting it together, that's for sure. So, empty your spit valves, and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The marching band from Eastern Senior High School, part of the District of Columbia Public Schools, has been honored with a new street name. A street between North Carolina Avenue and 17th Street in Northeast Washington, D.C., where the band typically practices, will now be called Blue and White Marching Machine Way. This past June, the D.C. Council unanimously passed an act to honorarily rename the portion of A Street between its 1300 and 1600 blocks after the band. Eastern High School principal Stephen Miller said, quote, "We've been in this spot for 101 years. Our connection with the community is very deep. My mother, 70 years ago, grew up here, and she heard the band here." The Blue and White Marching Machine has marched in NFL halftime shows, presidential inaugural parades, and the FIFA World Cup opening ceremony. The band's next major appearance will be in London, England, in the 2025-2026 London New Year's Day Parade and Festival. Dateline, Jackson, Mississippi. Credit to the reporting of the online media outlet HBCU Game Day on this story once again. Ariel Woods, a senior from Dallas, Texas, has been selected as just the fourth female drum major in the century-long history of the Jackson State University Sonic Boom of the South. The 300-member band is led by 5 drum majors every year, and they're collectively known as the Jackson 5. Woods is the first woman to serve as drum major for the Jackson State Band since Deshawn Roberts held the role in 2017. Roberts was the band's first woman drum major since 2006. In an interview, Woods told WAPT, the ABC television network affiliate in Jackson, quote, "I'm a figure for women. I'm a figure for little girls coming up who are in band and who want to be in this position as a drum major." The Sonic Boom of the South has performed at multiple NFL halftime shows, at the Motown 30th Anniversary Special, and as the surprise guest for the opening night of Drake and J. Cole's recent tour, as mentioned in a previous episode of this podcast. Woods said, quote, "This position is something I've been dreaming about for the last 7 years now. This is my second time trying out to be a drum major, so it's nothing short of an honor. It's nothing short of a blessing being placed in this position as a woman. I just know how prestigious this is." And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break and meet you on the other side. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, a couple of thoughts about trying to decide which band is the best. A little context for you about why I got thinking about this recently. Back in August, several of my band-adjacent friends and I spotted a meme that was making the social media rounds, and it got our attention for various reasons. It was a map of the United States, and inside each state's borders was the logo of a college or university. The title of the graphic was, "The Best College Marching Band in Every State." Well, obviously, for band people, this is like waving a red cape in front of a bull. Our first instinct probably is to look at the choices that the meme maker made and to agree or disagree. And in this beautiful land of ours with its storied First Amendment and its population full of people with no filter whatsoever, opinions are hurled out into our world willy-nilly, as it were, and this is allowed, encouraged even. But, as a colleague of mine once put it, opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got them, and sometimes they stink. I, for example, have been known to take to the online blog or social media spaces and pass judgment upon the competing DCI drum corps, and, a time or two, I have spoken only with the understandings that I had at the moment of seeing them and then writing about them. And afterward, friends of mine have whispered important and crucial facts and details and perspectives to me, which have caused me to realize that what I wrote may not have been entirely fair or accurate. And I'm remembering particularly an article that was posted on some vaguely college sports-oriented website several years ago, which purported to rank from worst to best all the things about the MAC, the Mid-American Conference, including stadiums, uniforms, non-conference schedules, conference rivalries, and bands. That article listed my alma mater band as the best of them, and of course I instinctively thought, well, yeah, and hooray for the power in class. So far, so good. I only had one gripe about the article, namely, its author, who noted that he had marched for 8 years and had a degree in music, wrote brief assessments of all the bands, and the assessments toward the lesser end of the list got a little nasty. If I had been an alum or a current member of some of those bands, I doubt I would have cared to read sentences like, "Here's a video of Band X giving an uninspired performance of mediocre arrangements of some outstanding music." Or, "This video is somewhat typical of what I've seen from Band Y. A reasonably well-written and tolerably well-played show is marred by poor marching." Or, "Here is Band Z playing at a high school stadium and looking and sounding for all the world like a high school marching band." Since he was a band alum, metaphorically, it may not have been the smartest thing for that author to set fire to the boat he was sitting in. Anyway, back to the best college bands in each state meme I was talking about. And no, I'm not going to identify the Twitter account that first posted that meme, because whether they deserve some righteous pushback or not, this is yet another example of list journalism. 10 things you didn't know about the Klingons, or 15 moments these athletes regretted instantly. Nothing that'll win a Pulitzer Prize, but instead something that's designed to get clicks, generate website traffic, all that stuff. And it isn't focused on literary flair, or even oftentimes a basis in provable fact. But it's the same idea as that Mid-American Conference ranking article. One person's opinion gets hurled out there, it's just an opinion, but there are at least 50 opportunities on that particular map for someone to get righteously and very possibly rightly peeved about the picks, about some self-appointed expert's choice, or worse, about the choices and declarations of somebody who knows nothing about nothing. Certainly about band. So in the California space, USC's logo appears, but the folks at Riverside Community College might have something to say about that. In the Ohio space, the logo of Ohio University appears, and will the ranks of the best damn band in the land get riled up. Inside the Oklahoma outline is the logo of the University of Oklahoma, OU, and you might well make the argument that this is a good call, but I've seen Oklahoma State have some very good days. The list goes on, for 47 more states. It's anywhere from vexing to excruciating, depending on how much you follow college bands in the fall. And since a good deal of my listenership may be wondering about this, guess what logo appeared inside the Massachusetts outline? Let's just say Tom Lehrer wrote a song about them.
Fight fiercely, Harvard. Fight, fight, fight. Demonstrate to them our skill.
Hey, musically they did play really well anytime I saw them live. But it does send me back to what my college band director said to us often, if bands don't support each other, who the heck will? So no, these articles and memes don't help. Maybe it's better to, as another college band instructor of mine used to say, consider the source, and move merrily forward regardless. Who's got the best band anywhere? You do. Now then, on the other side of the break, a conversation with a marketing visionary. In keeping with the episode theme mentioned in my intro, it's seemingly from out of left field, straight into the band world. Have I intrigued you sufficiently? Okay, let's modulate and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a gentleman, the likes of whom you have not heard on the BandWagon podcast yet. At first glance, you read his bio, and it's not specifically within the band world proper, and yet you only have to think for about 5 seconds and you realize that it's not just band adjacent, it absolutely addresses topics that are central to any band organization, from how it's organized conceptually to how it functions on a day-to-day, rehearsal-to-rehearsal basis. Now, I'm going to see if I can boil this down, and in doing so, kind of mute the impact of it a little bit, but here it goes. Scott Monty is an executive coach, an advisor, a public speaker. He spent 6 years as an executive at Ford Motor Company, where he helped turn the company around with the ability to merge technology with humanity. He served as a strategic advisor across a range of business functions, leading the company's global social media strategy. He was ranked by this is great stuff. He was ranked by The Economist as #1 atop the list of 25 social business leaders, and the CEO of the Ford company called him a visionary. For some time, he's been the creator of a podcast that's gone, I think, by at least a couple of names, if I'm not mistaken. It explores character strengths for leaders, finding the past in the present and the present in the past, and preparing for the future. And for quite some time, I've been a listener because those podcast episodes contain really valuable thoughts. They're presented thoughtfully and thought-provokingly, and in a radio voice that I can only hope to aspire to. And in fact, that voice is the reason I first figured out who he was a considerable amount of time ago as part of the band world. And all of that is why I've been looking forward to having him on the program. Please help me welcome to the program, Scott Monty. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Rob. It's good to be here with you.
It's good to see you again. Before we got started recording, I was saying it's been forever.
It has. It has. What a sight for sore eyes, right? Or a sight for sore ears in the audio world.
With all of that as preamble and a whole lot of statements that are leaving people wondering, what are we going to be listening to? There are a bunch of topics that I'm looking forward to digging into. But first, let me open this up with my standard introductory questions so that people can get a sense of who they're listening to, at least maybe from a band angle. So what's your primary instrument? Do you have one?
Oh, goodness. Well, this is going to be kind of a convoluted story because I got started in elementary school, like so many kids do, around the 4th or 5th grade or so. I had started in the percussion section. I remember Mr. Tangway at the Spalding Elementary School, who himself was a drummer, spending time with us on the little drum pads and, practicing at home. But I realized at the same time that just practicing on this little drum pad wasn't going to be enough for me. I wanted to explore something, let's say, more melodical. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think about it, I turned to my grandmother on the Polish side of my family. And I said, Gram, what instrument should I play? And Gram was a devoted watcher of the Lawrence Welk Show. And of course, she said, well, why not try the accordion? And being a young and impressionable 9, 10-year-old, I said, okay, that sounds interesting. And so for 10 years, I was trained classically on the accordion. And I did the percussion section in school at the same time. So when I eventually arrived at Boston University, yes, I did bring the accordion with me, but that's a back-breaking instrument to carry around the field. So I joined the drum line.
Speaking as a fellow who's got an accordion-playing brother-in-law, amongst many other things, I don't tell accordion jokes.
Well, everyone knows that classic split-screen Far Side cartoon where they've got the angels saying, welcome to heaven, here's your harp, and then down below, welcome to hell, here's your accordion. A well-played accordion is a treat for the ears. A horribly played accordion, not so much.
Is there a list of bands that you've been active with throughout your life?
Yeah. So as I said, when I got to Boston University, I joined the marching band and was part of Kappa Kappa Psi, the fraternity there, the band-related fraternity. For 3 years, I was part of the drum line for marching band and also did the pep band and the concert band as well. And I moved up from bass drum to snare to quads. But that junior year, I was a resident assistant, and we had RA training in late summer, early fall, just before the students arrived, which is the same time as everyone band camp. So I could not commit to both. However, Kappa Kappa Psi required me to be in band every semester. In speaking with, I think Jim Odell had left by then, so it was Joe Wright. What could I do to be of service to the band, still be involved and qualify? And lo and behold, I've always had a certain natural affinity for the microphone. So I said, well, why don't I volunteer my services to be the pregame and halftime announcer up in the PA booth? And they thought that was a great idea. And so I started writing these scripts that were tinged with little throwaway lines, comedy, etc. So I had fun with it at the same time, using my own natural instrument of my voice. Went on to graduate school and participated in the all-university orchestra and, of course, the alumni concert band at the same time. So I remained active with the BU band community for as long as I was enrolled there.
And I say we met at Boston University. To be truthful about it, the first few times we met, it was me standing down on the sideline and wondering what in the world Scott Monty was going to say before the band started to play at halftime.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Nickerson Field, home of the Boston University Terriers.
They were the pride of Commonwealth Avenue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the pride of Boston University's Commonwealth. Please try our Charles River Chowder at halftime.
I just careened back 30 years, sir. Oh, gosh. Usually I ask people, do you have a current band-related role? And you may well, but in poking around various resources online, I took note that you are on the board of directors, the board of trustees, of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a trustee of the DSO. I had the great pleasure of being recruited by them back when I was still at Ford, and Leonard Slatkin was the musical director and principal conductor. And this would have been around 2010, 2011. And his mission for the DSO, which had just come out of contract negotiation, the city of Detroit was struggling at the time. The musicians were on strike, and they effectively and successfully negotiated their contract and were rewarded to the degree to which they are deserving. And it's a fine orchestra. Leonard Slatkin gets there, and he made it his mission to make them the most accessible orchestra on the planet. All right. So what does that mean? Well, I was recruited primarily because of my digital media, digital communications expertise. And the idea here was, rather than telling people at a concert like they always do to put away your phones, he actually asked them to take out their phones, usually at the encore, not during the main performance, but he would do specific performances where he encouraged people to record and share and get the message out about the orchestra. And at the same time, the orchestra was developing and producing its own app by which it could stream its performances every weekend for listeners and viewers. And there would be, an upsell there. If you were a subscriber, a ticket holder, et cetera, you would have access to additional features, but it was all in service of making it possible for people to attend and enjoy a DSO concert without having to be in Orchestra Hall in downtown Detroit. I mean, that actually set them up really well for success for when COVID hit and everything was locked down. They performed remotely with each other, and obviously all of us were able to follow along and enjoy it as well.
Your work, well, I don't know whether I want to say whether it focuses mostly on the social media strategy angle.
It used to. I arrived at Ford in mid-2008, just before the carpocalypse started, so that was fun. To kind of set the direction for the company with respect to its digital communications and social media strategy. them never having had an executive in charge of this before. They didn't know exactly what to do. And Ford was in the process of reinvention and formulating its comeback story. So digital and social media would be essential in helping to tell that story to the public and to bring other people's stories to the fore, so they could help tell the story as well in their own view. Did that for about 6 years at Ford Motor Company with a dynamite CEO, well, probably one of the best leaders I have ever had the pleasure to work with, or learn about, Alan Mullally. Alan was finishing up his tenure in 2014, and I decided that that would be a good time for me to step out as well. I had achieved with my team the things we wanted to achieve, and just felt like it would be appropriate to take what I learned and to start sharing it with other people. This was the whole process at Ford, that I wasn't just responsible for a department. I would actually educate people across the company about how to effectively think about social media strategy, how to integrate it into the wider company strategies and efforts. So it wasn't all a bunch of siloed kind of things. It was all a lot of coordination, a lot of simply working together, which was Alan's philosophy, is a working together management system that he put together. He was an engineer by training, but he had a good sense of human behavior. And so he got everyone, like a conductor, right? He got everyone working together across the organization so that they weren't working at cross purposes. They were actually working to create something better together. I wanted to take what I had learned and start sharing that with other companies, large and small. And what I've realized over time, Rob, is that the social media that's one branch of things, and I've become less and less engaged with it. And social media has changed remarkably since I left. But I realized that at the base of all of that was human behavior, just like Alan knew. And I began studying leadership more and more, and how leaders communicate with each other, how they build something together and set the tone for the people that work with them, all of their stakeholders, not just the employees, but vendors and customers and shareholders and all the rest. Right? This is important in terms of how the human mind thinks, how we tell stories, how we bring other people along. And it's developed, much to my surprise, into an executive coaching and advising practice. And I couldn't be more pleased at this point.
I culled a number of quotes from a number of places, not least scottmonty.com, which will show up in the show notes for this episode. Don't you worry. A number of them, when I was reading them, I thought that's going to frame what we end up talking about today, no doubt. There was one of them that really struck, well, a number of them. One of them, I'm a champion for leaders who are lifelong learners, which made me go, okay, let's talk. The one that I think can really frame what we're doing here today, it says, if you want a talented, motivated, and skilled team that works together, a team filled with high performers, low turnover, and a growth mentality, it comes down to three things: character, how I conduct myself; culture, how I show up for my team; storytelling, how I lead an organization. And we can talk about corporations and companies, and to me, it just screams band.
I hadn't thought about it until I was preparing for this interview, Rob, but I think you're absolutely right. You think about some of the inspirational leaders that you may have had in band, whether they are section leaders or drum majors or music directors and conductors. What things do they have in common that make them appealing to you, or that make them stand out in your memory? Largely, they are enthusiastic about what they do. They listen to the feedback that they get, and then they change their behavior, hopefully, based on what they're hearing from their people. And they do an extraordinary job of making sure that everyone in their section, in their group, in their organization are on the same page, literally and figuratively, because that's how an organization, whether it's a band or a community group or a board or a Fortune 500 company, does its best, by working together and supporting each other. One of the things that I do with my clients comes directly out of what I learned at Ford. Every Thursday morning at 7 a.m., Alan and all of his direct reports would hold a 3-hour marathon session called the BPR, the Business Plan Review. And this is from Alan's engineering mentality. The idea here is every executive gets 10 minutes to highlight his or her plan, and highlight the things that are going well and the things that aren't going so well. And the idea is that when things aren't going so well, you're transparent about it. You don't hide it, right? Because transparency encourages people to come out of the woodwork to help stand each other up. I've seen something like this happen in my organization before. Here's how we addressed it. Why don't you try that? Or let me assign a couple of my people to this and see if we can help get you out of the jam. Just like if you're in a rehearsal and somebody's struggling, the idea isn't to let them keep struggling and ruin it for the rest of the organization. The idea is to work with them on what it is that they're having problems with.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you as a percussionist how many times I would sit at the back of that orchestra or that band, rolling my eyes to myself, waiting, sometimes patiently, sometimes impatiently, for somebody in the flute section or the woodwinds or the horns to work out their thing under the specific gaze of the conductor as everyone else was waiting. And then, of course, we all tried it together and it sounded great. It's extraordinary to me how many parallels there are between the band world and the business world in that respect.
Well, as a leader in an organization, whether you have a title or not, a couple of things have always struck me. One is you're always on stage. Somebody's always looking to see what you're doing, and whatever they see you doing, they figure that's how it must be done. It's a lot of work, but to constantly kind of keep tabs on one's own self and to think, okay, so how am I, not only how am I coming across, but what is driving what I'm doing at the core of what I'm doing. I'm going to quote some titles from recent episodes of the podcast that you do, and just the titles alone, even without listening to the episodes, things like How to Build Accountability, Ars Gratia Artis for Latin scholars, which I am, by the way, and you are as well, Art for the Love of Art, Do What You Love, Core Leadership Skills, Influence and Communication, all things that, particularly if you're a drum major, particularly if you're a section leader, but even if you're just, how do I put this, a loudmouth in the band.
Welcome to the drum line.
I wasn't going to go there because there are plenty of drummer jokes out there, and I don't need to contribute.
Leave it to us. We'll handle it for you. Just like the accordionists, we're very good at self-humor.
And half of those jokes you could rip out drummer and put in some other instrument anyway.
Well, and that's the thing. So one of the core tenets, one of the core behaviors we had at Ford was enjoy the journey, right? Have fun, but never at someone else's expense. Right. And I think that's something that we don't concentrate on enough. When people are self-reverential, when they turn the humor on themselves, they allow them to have a sense of humor about themselves, to laugh at mistakes they've made, or to poke fun at, those in your in-group. I think that shows a high degree of self-awareness and of comfort, right? And humor. These are just classic character traits. But when you take that humor and you turn it almost as a weapon against someone else and embarrass them or call them out for some reason, well, then I think you lose respect in other people's eyes because you're not treating the other person with dignity that way. You're not treating them with the respect that they deserve. If they want to make fun of themselves, fine. But again, we don't want to have fun make fun of other people or have fun at their expense. And I think particularly in band, as these groups, the trumpeters have a certain reputation and the drum line has a reputation. And God, we all know the sousaphones have a reputation, but they have fun with it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing. They're aware of it and they embrace it and they have fun. And that encourages other people to have fun as well.
And how you're treating individuals within an ensemble or an organization sets the tone for the overall culture that you build, up or down. On your website, when you describe your focuses for your coaching and advising, you talk about things like becoming a better leader, leading with authenticity, building a more cohesive team, connecting your values to your actions. They're all overarching ideas that stem from treating individuals in a certain way. Recently, it seems like more people seem to feel freer to express themselves regardless of how their expressions land, regardless of how they may hit whoever else is in the blast zone. when people talk up freedom of speech, they don't as often talk up the idea that with freedom of speech does not come freedom from consequences or accountability. And when you're approaching things that way, empathy goes out the window. And how many organizations have we seen spiral out of control or into oblivion because of that?
Well, that's exactly right. And I think you hit on it there, Rob, with accountability and empathy. And these are the things we built in the BPR. The idea that transparency builds accountability. We hold each other responsible and accountable for the areas that we are responsible for our actions. But we also have a genuine sense of knowing what it's like to be in a jam and not liking that and being willing to help other people out. This whole idea, particularly of empathy or of humor or of vulnerability or of resilience, a lot of these kinds of character traits, values that I like to talk about, a lot of these are thought of as the quote unquote soft skills. Versus the hard skills, understanding numbers and data and all the rest. Well, hard skills you can teach anyone. Soft skills you can teach anyone too, but it requires somebody to want to learn them. And quite frankly, I think soft skills are hard. They are difficult. But if you lean into them, if you make sure that you are somebody who is embracing self-awareness and empathy and resilience and vulnerability and gratitude and knowing how to apologize well. That's another thing I think we don't see from many people these days. Is the ability to apologize. They plow through, results be damned, and they don't care who they hurt along the way. And even when they're called out on it, they never apologize. And I think that is toxic. And like I said before about thinking about back to those who you worked with, who have inspired you or who you feel great about or who you remember with a smile on your face and in your heart. It's those leaders who were not toxic. Those leaders who actually made you want to be around them rather than who repelled you. And one of the great interviews I had early on in the Timeless Leadership podcast was a guy by the name of Harry Cohen. Harry was an executive coach of mine at Ford. He also owns a great martini and oyster bar out here in Ann Arbor. Harry wrote a book called Be the Sun, Not the Salt, right? You want to be the sun on people's flowers and petals and not the salt on their roots. Because what does salt do? It makes things shrivel up and die. But when you think about a sunflower, what does a sunflower do? It follows the path of the sun throughout the day. It wants to be in that sunshine. So the question is, with all of these soft skills, with all of these things like empathy, vulnerability, resilience, etc., how are you showing up every day and being someone else's sun and inspiring them to carry that on to the people in their lives, whether it's on their team or their friends or their family at home or what have you?
And after there's been a moment of challenge, a moment of difficulty, are you the sort of person that looks somebody in the eye and say, I am sorry that I did that to you, or I am sorry that I said something that didn't help? Or are you the person that puts out the press release that says, if you were offended, I'm sorry? The apology that's not an apology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you hear the difference there, that the second one does not take responsibility for the behavior. It places the blame on the person who was feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
We all have feelings. There's no question. And we are allowed to feel the way we feel, but it all comes down to how you respond. But when someone else causes you to feel a certain way, and this is part of just one-on-one human kind of discourse, the helpful thing to say isn't you did X to me. It's here's how I felt, right? And here's what you did in relation to that. So you can't take away how someone felt about something, but you can take responsibility for the actions that led to them feeling that way.
And yes, dear listener, I'm doing it to you one more time, but I think you'll find it worthwhile to come back when episode 36 drops and to listen to the rest of my talk with the great Scott Monty. Some conversations, you gotta just let them keep on, they're that good. Meanwhile, after a brief tenuto, I'll return with a tale about a truck. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is my Allentown story. The Collegiate Marching Band Festival was held again a couple of weeks ago for, I think, the 28th time. Yes, children, there was a time when college bands from the northeastern United States did not convene for the purposes of performing and cheering for each other and such. As such, plenty of stories have been generated since 1995, when the first one happened, with between a dozen and a dozen and a half bands, mainly from Pennsylvania, but also from New England and New York and New Jersey and Delaware. That year, I happened to be a first-year grad assistant with Boston University. I remember sitting in the office of the BU band director, hi Joe, while he had a conversation with the director of the Delaware band, hi Heidi, and it was a little like listening to the Bob Newhart comedy bit where you only hear his half of the conversation as he pretends to talk to Abraham Lincoln about writing the Gettysburg Address, or to Sir Walter Raleigh about this new idea of taking a bunch of leaves and setting them on fire and then sticking them in your mouth. The two college band directors were talking about what was going to happen probably at this new college band festival thingy, and they noted that I had written musical arrangements for the BU band, the Delaware band, and the UMass band, and all three of those bands were going to be in Allentown. And Joe made a joke about that, which I'm not going to include here, not because it was inappropriate or obscene or racist or anything like that. In fact, it was pretty funny. But 99% of all jokes are at somebody's expense, and this joke was not part of the 1% that wasn't. And, sorry, but this podcast is meant to lift people in bands up, and so I'll just move on now. Anyway, one of the jobs I inherited as the BU band's grad assistant was that of equipment truck driver, and I was only too happy to jump into the cab of a box truck and head out on the road, desperately trying to keep up with the band buses. Sitting up high, can see over all the cars, only the thing I'd dreamed about doing when I was 5 years old. I learned a lot. I learned what diesel truck fuel smells like when you get it all over your hands and forearms at the refueling station. Important stuff like that. I learned how to improvise and adapt to sudden moments of need or changes of plans or whatever. Gained a whole lot of respect for people who do this sort of thing for a living. I learned to pay very close attention to the signs that talked about clearance. No, I didn't have a problem. I just learned to watch for that sort of thing. I also learned about the wide variety of people who drive buses and trucks for a living. A few of them were difficult, but most of them were terrific people and very competent movers of large-wheeled metal objects. Just about 10 years ago, I wrote a piece for my blog recounting a memory which contained just about all of that. The good, the bad, the ugly, the unscripted, the we'll laugh about all this someday. And, lightly edited, here it is. My Allentown band trip truck driving story from late September 1996. The blog post was called, Are You Kidding? I read a brief post on the local social media engine this afternoon that referenced the Vince Lombardi rest stop toward the very northern end of the New Jersey Turnpike. For most people, this location is, at best, a place to remedy the difficulties of a long highway journey. Gotta go, gotta eat. For most people, this location is assuredly not a garden spot, in spite of it being located in the Garden State. For most people, this location is best experienced by utilizing, as one of my favorite teachers once said, the old get in, get out deal. But if you're a college band person and your band ever traveled between New England and the lower mid-Atlantic, this joint may be the location of one or more of your favorite memories. Or at the very least, when you drive past at 70 miles an hour, you still look over at it and smile a little. In my case, not a memory I would like to experience again necessarily, but as with so many things in life, it's amusing now. The second-year graduate assistant of the Boston University Band, your humble correspondent, stepped up into the cab of the band's equipment truck. It was the biggest truck which I was licensed to drive, and easily the biggest vehicle I had ever been in charge of, then or since. I was up high and in control. The second annual Allentown College Band Show was finished, and so was our weekend trip, which had taken us from Boston to Bridgewater State College, a brief appearance at their football halftime, to the University of Delaware, this was when BU had a football team to put on the field against UD, to Allentown, Pennsylvania, to participate in a Sunday afternoon of college marching band performances. That late September afternoon was yielding to early evening, and the sun was still shining but not far above the horizon. The two BU buses pulled away from J. Bernie Crum Stadium and headed for whatever interstate gets you from Allentown to 95, and I still, after all these years, am not clear about which one that is. Therefore, I attached my truck, figuratively, to the back bumper of the second bus and worked hard not to lose it amidst the considerable Sunday afternoon end-of-weekend traffic. It seemed to be getting darker, and darker, and darker. Yes, the sun was going down, and it was that wonderful twilight during which it is a trial to drive sometimes. but it seemed comparatively very dark considering my headlights were on. Weren't they? I tugged on the lever that controlled the truck's headlights, and in an instant I knew what the rest of the trip was going to be like. The high beams came on. I let go of the lever, and the high beams went off, and the regular headlights did not come on, either of them. And now it seemed rather exceptionally dark. In order to see properly, I had to pull the high beam lever back and hold it there, all the way to I-95 and the Jersey Turnpike, and all the way up the Turnpike. Not complaining, you do what you gotta do. Mr. Pollyanna here declared that it was great that the high beams were both working very well. I flashed the high beams off on at the second bus, trying to get the driver's attention. The lead bus was pulling away at a fully ridiculous rate of speed. Throughout the weekend, I'd gotten the impression that the two bus drivers didn't get on as well as they could have, and it had been curious to watch driver 1 pull lane-changing maneuvers, seemingly in such a way that driver 2 had to work extra hard to match those lane changes without wiping out cars while trying. I knew that my not-quite late-model truck had zero chance of catching up to driver 1, but somehow, without words, and at the time without cell phones or any other means of electronic communication, I successfully suggested that driver 2 had better not kick in the warp drive and leave me out there too. Happily, he didn't. We formed a pathetic little convoy, the smallest convoy you can make without being a single vehicle. Bus changes lanes, truck changes lanes. Bus changes lanes, truck changes lanes. Don't ask why, just do. I probably looked like a little kid trooping around after a high school football player he idolized. After either 90 minutes or 1,000 years of driving, I saw driver 2 get in the exit lane that would take us to the mighty Vince Lombardi service area, and I gave out with a tiny little, yay. Idly, I had wondered if there was a plan, or whether all the BU vehicles were free agents now. By this time, I had cataloged most of the possible ways to describe this experience that could possibly avoid dropping F-bombs, but was running dangerously low on ideas. Mr. Pollyanna had, he now is forced to admit, become more of a Bill Cosby foul filth and your filth and foul expresser of notions. I will smack the truck rental guy across the nose, lousy pre-trip alleged maintenance check, amateur hour operation, grouse, grouse, grouse. We pulled into the Vince parking lot, cozied up to where bus 1 was parked, and had been for some time, and shut our engines off. I shook my left hand vigorously to see if blood wanted to renew its membership. Keys out of the ignition, don't have to shut the lights off, and I stumbled down out of the cab. I followed the stream of BU band members from bus 2 through the rear entrance of the Vince rest stop building and found a fast food vendor line to join. I stood right behind driver 2. Driver 1 walked over to his colleague, looked at him, looked at me, and cheerfully said words I shall never ever forget. They may ring in my ears until I join the bleedin' choir invisible. Well, I think it's going pretty well, don't you? Your mild-mannered correspondent did consider over the course of a long split second what the best response might be. I've always wondered what it would be like to take advantage of that perfect opportunity to righteously unload on someone who surely had it coming. Sadly, I'm still wondering. Instead, I looked at driver 1, then at driver 2, then back at driver 1, and executed a maneuver I have watched a very dear colleague of mine use to great effect. And yes, that colleague was the director of the Delaware Band. I closed my eyes very slowly, carried out a textbook about face, opened my eyes, and slowly walked away. Yeah, I have plenty of wonderful Allentown memories, about which you will hear from time to time in this segment, but that's one that kind of sticks out, like the sore thumb that I wanted to give bus driver number 1. When I return in a moment, I have a quick explainer about the last 2 episodes, since a few folks have asked. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, as I mentioned before the break, a couple of listeners have inquired about the last 2 episodes of BandWagon, specifically their titles. You may or may not have paid much attention to my podcast titles. They always are at least an oblique reference to the main topic of my trio section conversations. Sometimes they're song titles, sometimes they're phrases that my trio guests have dropped. Not always, but mostly do I try to make them anywhere from a raised eyebrow quip to an out-and-out dad joke grade pun. On occasion, though, they've been on the serious side. And for the first time in the series so far, one episode title has made very little sense until the next episode's title has been revealed the following week. The last 2 episodes were called Over Every Mountain There Is a Path, and Although It May Not Be Seen from the Valley. It was inspired by both Michael Coogan's and my long and winding professional paths in the world of music education. It's a quote from the American poet Theodore Roethke. That's Roethke. He lived from 1908 to 1963 and is regarded as one of the most accomplished and influential poets of his generation. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1954 and the annual National Book Award for Poetry twice. U.S. Poet Laureate and author James Dickey said that Roethke was, quote, "in my opinion, the greatest poet this country has yet produced." He was also a respected poetry teacher and taught at the University of Washington for 15 years. His students from that period themselves won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry, and 2 others were nominated for the award. And now you know. Heck, now I know. I just saw the quote and thought, perfecto. Now I'm going to go read Roethke's poetry and see for myself. Well, not right now, but in about 2 minutes. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. These contact links and links to our news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Scott Monty, as well as the BandWagon merch store, powered by TeePublic, can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of somebody whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton. Detail, dress center.